ma'am. I am Maria Isabel M. Cañete. I am here to report the Module 1 of CA200. So, introduction. Leadership concerns and management functions define the essential elements of prison administration. So, both leadership and management are needed for effective prison administration to exist, and this piece will examine the following topics: drawing a distinction between leadership and management, the role of politics in prison administration, and the importance of correctional staff supervision and development. So the general overviews: Carlson and Garrett 1999 states that the prison administration fundamentally involves the application of both leadership and management techniques to correctional institutions. So the former addresses concerns in the context of correctional institutions charged with maintaining the safety and security of both prisoners and staff within the jurisdictional authority of a state or the federal government, while the latter comprises the fundamental local correctional institutions. So, rather, the purpose here is to provide a general overview of how prison administration can be conceptualized and a brief discussion of the important issues that prison administrators encounter daily. So, it will really it will rely very heavily on the work that has been done on business, governmental agencies, and non-profits. Examination of correctional administration have produced some very interesting textbooks and treatises. So there is no attempt to examine the differences between prison management and prison in these works. So at the core of their examination is how legal and humane changes can occur within prison. So these works have produced compelling portrayals and discussion regarding the leadership and management of public and private organizations with potential application to prisons. So the prison administration within the framework of its penal legislation classifies the prisoners and determines the treatment program for them. Therefore, we can summarize that the enforcement and the administration of criminal justice system in essence are to arrest, sentence, and rehabilitate the same offender. So the prison administration in India. The original term used for prison is a jail or gaol. Prison is defined as a place properly arranged and equipped for reception persons who by legal processes are committed to it for safe custody while awaiting trial or for punishment. So in Section 3 of Prisons Act 1894 defines the prison as prison means any jail or place used permanently or temporarily under general or special orders of the state government of detention of prisoners include all lands and including appurtenant thereto, but does not include any place for the confinement of prisoners who are exclusively in the custody of the police. So prison is a place where under trials as well as the convict inmates are kept today. In ancient era, however, the condition was not the same. The prisons were only for detention of offenders for the period of their trial and not the place where offenders came for punishment. So, during the Mughal period, the prisoners were kept under strict surveillance and control of authorities. At the time of the takeover the country by the Britishers, the prisons in India were in a terrible condition. After independence, the subject of jails, law and order, police and prisons were placed under state lease in the 7th schedule of the Constitution of India. So Reckless, who was an expert of the UNO, was invited to make his recommendation in 1951. Later on, a committee was also appointed to prepare an all-India conference of Inspector Generals of Prisons. So Government of India appointed the All India Jail Reforms Committee 1980 to 1883, whose chairman was A.N. Mullah J., who has recommended a draft national police on jail reforms. So a new law has been enacted to safeguard the children, which is known as juvenile justice. Care and Protection of Children Amendment Act 2006. So there are a number of positive and negative aspects of prison prison administration in India. The prison administration involves security and discipline. It involves enforcement of rules and regulation in the management of prison system. So the various recommendations made by the Jail Committee of 1919 to 1920 paved the way for abolition of inhumane punishments like treadmill, crank, grinding grain, short drill, mental breaking, etc. have been abolished, and gradually a trend developed in form of enforcement of discipline based on inducement involving payment of wages for labor rendered, remissions of punishment due to good conduct, creation of facilities like canteens, and etc. So beside the physical protection given the prisoners and the elimination of unnecessary restraints, many other issues regarding the rights of the prisoners have attracted the attention of courts in India. So the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 showed its concern for prisoners. The constitutional rights of prisoners also cover a wide range of rights of personal and political nature, including rights such as pertaining religion, association, election, and etc. So the Supreme Court of India has been active in responding to human rights violation in Indian jails, and it recognized a number of rights of prisoners by interpreting Articles 21, 19, 22, 32, 37, 39 of the Constitution in a humane way. So it has recommended the incorporation of some rights in proposed scheme of national prison legislation like right to the human dignity, right to minimum needs, right to access law, right to communication, right against arbitrary prison right prison punishment, right to meaningful and gainful employment, and right to be released on due date. So in India, owing the mass illiteracy, most of the prisoners do not have even elementary education. Only 33% do not have even elementary education. Only 33% of male convicts are illiterate, and in case of women, the percentage is only 12. So academic education gives a sense of achievement to the prisoner, which goes a in long way in exercising corrective influences. So in India, rules in the jail manuals recognize the significance of religion and religious instruction for the reformation of prisoners. Prisoners of all communities are offered facilities for their religious observance. Teachers selected by the district magistrates deliver lectures on religious and moral subjects for an hour once a week. So the India does not really focus in academic education, but they focus in religious, so that when they release, they have they still they still have faith in Allah, which is their God, and they will spread the word of Allah. So one of the major problems in prison administration these days is overcrowding. It is common in all states. In 2007, there were a total of 1,140 prisons in country with authorized capacity of 233,543 prisoners, whereas prison population was 326 prisoners, which meant 39.80% overcrowding in jails in India. To emphasize the constitutional and legal rights of the prisoners, whether this use of imprisonment is inevitable or not, but there is no doubt that imprisonment as a mode of punishment has already been affected adversely to significant extent by other methods like probation, parole, and work release. So there are 5 facts of the Philippines incarceration system. In 2018, the Philippines held the 6th highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries. As of 2018, the Philippines population rested at 108.31 million people, and 2015,000 215,000 of those people were incarcerated. So one of the cause is severe overcrowding. So when Rodrigo won the presidential election on 2016, he promised to end crime within 6 months. So this promise also included the cleaning of tens of thousands of criminals. Duterte's election led to the infamous war on drugs and eventually overcrowded prisons. Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that safely house 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. Similarly, a room designated for 30 people holds about 130 in the Quezon City Jail. This severe overcrowding in prisons leads to illness and death tolls in the thousands. So second, pre-trial detainees. According to the World Prison Brief, 75.1 of incarcerations within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial. So in 2018, 422,000 of 188,278 prisoners were pre-trial detainees. So many. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentence without conviction. Pre-trial detention is found in judicial systems all over the world. In countries like Philippines, people may serve time that outweighs their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. Number 3. High death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid prison. According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, these deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, and inmate violence. At the 2019 Philippine Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. In addition to overcrowding, poor living conditions, and inmate violence, NBP lacks not nutritional food and basic health care. On account of these living conditions, Tamayo reports that at least one prisoner dies at NBP each day. So human rights advocates have also called for the release of vulnerable inmates, hoping to protect them from poor living conditions. So number 4, vigilante justice. Duterte's war on drugs escalated during his presidency. So jobless citizens were using drugs. This was one of few ways for some people to make money. Many homeless and impoverished people joined the vigilante teams. So in 2016, Duterte told the public, if you know any addicts, go ahead and kill them yourself. Together, the Philippines police force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and users since Duterte's presidency in 2016. So the Philippine war on drugs has created the belief that extrajudicial violence and murder are necessary to fight crime. But the Human Rights Watch has turned the narrative around on Duterte. They are publicizing information about the vigilante justice in the Philippines. Number 5. Corruption. In August 2018, the public learned the former mayor have been released from prison for good behavior. So he was originally charged for rape and homicide in 1993. So later that year, senators stated that inmates could live like kings for a fee. This information led to further allegations. Prison workers and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contraband to inmates. So the possible fix is, with the increased awareness of the Philippine prison system, there is hope that conditions will be improved and vigilante justice will end. It will take time to fix the Philippine judicial and incarceration system. However, with the help of advocacy groups like the Human Rights Watch, a change could come sooner than expected. By Marley Ingram. The history of prisons. From the birth of modern civilization in 3rd millennia BC, almost every major ancient civilization used concept of prison as a means to detain and remove personal freedoms of incarcerated people. In addition of holding convicted or suspected criminals, prisons were often used for holding political prisoners, enemies of the state, and prisoners of the war. So the earliest records of prisons come from the first millennia BC, located in the areas of mighty ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and Egypt. The primary source of their detention were not dungeons, high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. Ancient Roman Empire, however, continued to use harsher methods. Their prisons were built almost exclusively underground, with tight and claustrophobic passageway and cells. The prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls for life or for time. One of the most famous uses for the slaves in the Roman Empire was gladiators. In addition to fighting in the arena, sometimes after a lifetime of training in the special gladiator training houses or luduses, many slaves were tasked as a support workforce that enabled smoother run of the popular gladiator business. The most famous gladiator battleground, the mighty Colosseum arena in Rome, had a slave army of 224 slaves that worked daily as a power source of the complicated network of 24 elevators that transferred gladiators and their wild animal opponent from the underground dungeons to the arena floor. So the conditions in the European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. So with the rise of industry between 16th and 18th century, English prisons became overcrowded, new penal measures started being implemented, military pardon and penal transportations. During the end of 18th century, over 50,000 prisoners were transferred from England to penal colonies in North America and Australia. France even continued their practice of penal colonies until the middle of 20th century. The age of modern prisons that we know started with several prison reforms in 19th century in England. So wars that engulfed the world in the beginning of 20th century brought the formation of large amounts of war prison camps and concentration camps. Most famous examples of these types of prisons happened during World War II, when Nazi government formed over 300 detention centers in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminals, and others were detained without judicial process. So majority of them was eventually killed on an unprecedented massive scale that is today estimated to be within 11 and 17 million people. So next is the prison to antiquity. Our modern notions of crime and punishment are the result of millennia of human advancement. So here's a brief timeline of some of the most notable contributions. So first is Sumer 3500 BC. So Sumer is generally accepted as the first known urban civilization. So the ancient land of Sumer is located in modern day Iraq. So before Sumer, people lived in a small agricultural communities. Once Sumer developed, city-states appeared. This led to the formation of primitive governments. In order to control the crime that naturally derives from urban life, these governing bodies began to establish the origins of law and order. The rise of the Romans, 500 BC. The Roman Republic established itself as Western civilization first superpower. So law and order was maintained by soldiers who would walk the streets of cities, towns, and villages. So the mere presence of the soldier was a solid deterrent, and it helped keep crime under relative control. So Plato 428 to 347 BC. As a student of Socrates and teacher of Aristotle, Plato introduced the concept of that people are inherently good. So this belief greatly influenced the thoughts on crime and punishment as the centuries progressed. Aristotle 384 to 327 BC. Expanding on the teachings of Plato, Aristotle's view relied heavily on scientific observation as the tutor to Alexander the Great. Aristotle Aristotle would impart upon him the significance of science and its impact on decision making. So these teachings had a heavy influence on early forensic science and crime scene investigation. So next is the assassination of Julius Caesar, 44 BC. So many historians believe that the first historical recorded autopsy was conducted upon Julius Caesar. Next is the Materia Medica, 50 to 70 AD, widely considered to be the groundwork for forensic toxicology. The Materia Medica is a publication that categorized an array of flora, written by Greek physician Pedanius Dioscorides. The book discusses both the medicinal benefits and the poisonous aspects of various plants. So Frank Pledge, 1035. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Western world was highly destabilized. This led to the families in small communities policing themselves. So after hundreds of years of no centralized policing, the English concept of frank pledge was introduced. So under this concept, males over the age of 12 were formed into groups of 10. Their major was to capture and detain members of their own clan who committed a crime. So this was all done under the supervision of constable who was appointed by the crown. Next is Summa Theologica, 1265 to 1274. So exploring the concept of natural law, St. Thomas Aquinas wrote the Summa Theologica in furtherance of Plato's concept of people's inherent goodness. So at that criminal behavior damages both the victim and the soul of the criminal, said Aquinas. So justice of the peace. 14th century. The English crown began appointing justices of the peace to assist constables in their efforts to control crime. So these magistrates issued warrants, held arraignments, and tried minor criminal cases. Next is social contract, 1625-1762. Introduced by John Locke, the theory of the social contract discusses the various roles of people and government in maintaining a balanced society. At this point in this history, theories of crime and punishment shift from theological to secular. Next is insane asylums, 1750. The emergence of insane asylums across Europe led to study of inmates. So people were considered insane. So the work conducted by the Illinists laid the foundation for modern psychiatry. Next is Adolphe Quetelet, 1827. Using national crime statistics from France's Belgian statistician Adolphe Quetelet determined that there were correlations between demographic and crime. His studies led criminologists to understand how a person's age, gender, education, and socioeconomic status could have bearing on their propensity for criminal behavior. Next is Metropolitan Police Services, 1829. It was established in London. The Metropolitan Police Service became the first full-time professional and uniformed police force. So each officer was issued a copy of Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing book. So next is prison in 1850. The concept of a modern prison first arose in Europe during the mid-19th century. So governments were particularly interested with the doctor's findings as it allowed them to understand what prompts criminal behavior. As As governments became stronger, the officials demanded empirical evidences so that they were better equipped to control the populace. Next is the Kodak, 1888. The Kodak camera by George Eastman was a revolutionary piece of equipment on numerous levels, including its impact on policing. So as a result of this easily available Kodak camera, investigators could now memorialize crime scenes. So next is Crime Lab, 1910. The father of forensic, Dr. Edmond Locard, established the first modern crime lab in Lyon, France. So crime lab is used to investigate like the evidence that was gathered. DNA evidence, 1988. For the first time ever, DNA evidence was used in criminal court. Since 1988, there have been many significant advancement regarding both the manner in which crimes are investigated, as well as the methods for convicting and punishing the offender. Not only do our modern advancements help convict wrongdoers, but they also assess and exonerating the wrongly accused. So the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. So the Roman Catholic Church is the largest group of Christians in the world. There are about 1 billion members mostly in Europe, North and South America. So the leader of the Roman Catholic Church and successor of Jesus Christ is Pope. He governs the church from the Vatican, a small state situated in the heart of Rome. The Pope selects cardinals and bishops to lead, to lead the church throughout the world. It exercised the power throughout the Middle Ages. Missionaries traveled to other continents to spread Catholicism. Great architects created churches and cathedrals, and artists drew paintings and made frescoes. So the beliefs of Roman Catholics. The beliefs of Catholics are based on the Bible. Creeds are short statements of faith that Catholics believe in and recite in Mass. So Roman Catholics believe that there's only a single God who exists in three persons: the Father, the Father, Jesus Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They must love God and their fellow human beings. It asks its followers to live life as Jesus had, to follow their consciences. So there are sacraments that we believe in Roman Catholics. So there are 7 sacraments in Catholic Church. First is baptism. Is an event which a child or sometimes an adult is cleaned from their original sin, which is from Adam. Water is poured over a person as a sign of cleaning and starting a new life. Next is confirmation. It's usually performed at the age of 14 or 15 when a child turns into a young adult. A bishop or priest puts oil on the forehead of a worshipper as a sign of strength. Next is the Eucharist, or Mass is normally a Sunday celebration. So it consists of prayers, hymns, and texts from the Bible. A priest turns bread and wine into Christ's body and blood. At communion, worshippers eat Christ's body in front of a host. Next is confession, is a sacrament in which Catholics tell their sins to a priest. So they promise to God that they are sorry for what they have done. Next is holy orders, are sacraments that turn young men into priests or bishops. Then they lead their community in the name of God. Next is marriage, is a sacrament in which men and women promise to live together in a family. And the last is the anointment of the sick, is a sacrament that is given to a person who is very ill and in danger of dying. So the priest anoints a sick person with oil and frees them from sin so that they can rise to heaven. So question, how the church is organized? Catholics in a small town or village are usually organized in a parish. Priests or deacons are in charge of celebrating Mass, and performing other rituals in church today. So the history of the Roman Catholic Church. The history of Roman Catholic Church begins with the life and death of Jesus Christ about 200 years ago. So he he carried the Paul the apostle is often as the founder of the church. He carried the word of Jesus to the people. So many churches were built throughout the Roman Empire. During this time, Christianity spread throughout Europe and the Middle East. The Romans who ruled the areas had their own religion and at first persecuted and mistreated Christians. So at around 380, Christianity became the main Roman religion. By this time, there were two capitals in the empire, in Rome and Constantinople, now Istanbul. So when the western part of the Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Christianity still had a major influence in Europe. The eastern half became the Orthodox Church, and the western became the Roman Catholic Church. So, during the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church was the most powerful organization in Western Europe. It not only had religious power but also gained more and more political power. Pope launched crusades to conquer back the Holy Land from Muslims. Kings and leaders in the West were very often in direct conflict with the Pope and his bishop. So as time went on, Pope's influence in Europe diminished and he lost much of his land. By 1870, only the Vatican City remained. The Roman Catholic Church faced changes in society as well as new theories in science, which was mostly against. In 1962, Pope John the 13 opened the Second Vatican Council, which dealt with the church problems and modernized many things. So, problems of the Roman Catholic Church today. So, many people, especially in Europe, are turning their backs on the Roman Catholic Church for a number of reasons. They claim that the church has failed to live up the requirements of a 21st century society. Religious experts say that the church is too conservative and not open for change. The question, why is the Catholic Church so important to people's lives? So, the Catholic Church was so important to people's lives because back then, Bibles were written by the hand in Latin so that they could not read them in their local language. They relied on their respected leaders, religious leaders, who they said were their direct connection to God, to tell them what was in the Bible. So, history and influence of the Roman Catholic. So, Christianity advances into Western Europe. So, first is Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, and after years of persecution, he became the official religion of the empire. If the emperor is Catholic, so all the people inside the empire would be Catholic. So, Constantine also created a Christian council. So the Christian council decided answers the theological questions concerning the Christian faith. What do we believe concerning the human or divine nature of Christ Jesus and the explanation of the Trinity? So once answered these questions were decided, heretics were removed, imprisonment, excommunication, banishment, etc., thus resulting in a stronger and more organized Roman Catholic Church. Events that grew the church. Clovis, king of the Franks, converts to Christianity around 500 AD. When a king converts, all the people in the kingdom must convert to religion. So, Pope support to remove, Pippin the Short. Pippin was the mayor of the palace, a very powerful position of the Franks, not the king. So he requested and received the Pope's short support to remove the king and assume power. Pippin continues the growth of the Franks into the Italian peninsula, giving some of the conquered territory to the Pope. This is known as donation of Pippin and creates the Papal States. The next is Charlemagne. Pippin's son Charles the Great or Charlemagne continues to expand the Frankish Empire in Germany, Spain, and Italy. As the persons who bestow the title, the Pope claims the power to give that authority. This increases the Pope's political powers. So Charlemagne reforms the church by insisting that all priests in the kingdom be able to read and write, thus increasing their importance and value to the manners they serve. So Pope preserved the right to appoint church officials throughout Western Europe, even if they were thousands of miles away and did not know the person they were appointing. The political power of the Pope. The two great weapons of the Pope were excommunication and the interdict. If a king took too much land or invaded an ally of the church, the Pope could excommunicate the king, remove him from the church, therefore condemning him to hell, or place an interdict on the whole region, denying all the people the right to attend church services. The sacraments such as confession, last rites, and refusal to perform marriage ceremonies. So the popes often crowned the kings, thus establishing a precedent of church gives the authority for one to be king. So church functions like government. One issue that caused conflict between the church and the king was the use of church courts to put on trial anyone the church felt was in their jurisdiction and had violated canon law. So people would sometimes flee from the king in one region so they could be tried by the church in another region. Second is the church was a major landowner, controlling vast estate territory. At its height, it's estimated that the Roman Catholic Church owned up to one-fourth of the land of the Europe. So the role of the regular clergy, monks also were the keepers of knowledge, storing, translating, and copying the Bible and the books and other books and writings of the Roman world. So the role of the priest, a priest was the second most important person behind the Lord on the manure. The priest was responsible for administering the seven sacraments of the Bible. So church as a unifying force. There was a shared and unifying set of spiritual beliefs and rituals. So people met for their service, social gatherings, and festive celebration in the church. Pope John Paul II, the pro-life pope. Pope John Paul was the head of the Catholic Church and sovereign of the Vatican City state from 1978 until his death in 2005. Pope John Paul today used his strongest language over the condemned abortion and euthanasia. So Pope John Paul is really against of abortion and euthanasia because in the Bible, the 10 Commandments, the first is you shall not kill. So in an encyclical letter titled Evangelium Vitae. So in discussing legislation that permits abortion and euthanasia, the Pope said there was no obligation in conscience to obey such laws. He did not specifically say how Catholics were supposed to resist such law, but it was clear that he did not favor any use of violence. So on euthanasia, the Pope condemned all those who take decisions on life and death into their own hands. In the issues of abortion and euthanasia, the encyclical reaffirms the Catholic Church well-known position but casts them in new and solemn language. Still, the encyclical stops short of infallible dogma, invoking instead the authority vested by Jesus in Saint Peter and his successor and consistent tradition of the church teachings. So the only notable shift in Catholic doctrine to emerge is a move toward a ban against death penalty, which the church has until now held was sometimes permissible as a means of protecting society. So the pro-life activities, political action and legal reform in Evangelium Vitae. So what is Evangelium Vitae? The Gospel of Life is a warning and a plea to the people of the United States and other development nations. So Pope John Paul II declares that even now we are in the midst of enormous and dramatic clash between the culture of life and death and the culture of death. At stake in this struggle is respect for the basic human dignity of the weakest and most vulnerable members of the human family, the unborn, the frail, elderly, the poor, and the infirm. And since the character of any society is shaped in a decisive way by its treatment of those most in need of care and protection, the resolution of this struggle will determine what kind of people we are. So, in the culture of life, by contrast, freedom is never licensed to kill or oppress. Rather, freedom is ordered to goodness, to justice, to human solidarity. So freedom can never legitimately be invoked as a justification for actions which are contrary to human dignity and such as to moral truth. To claim a right to kill the unborn, the frail elderly, and other innocent human beings is, according to the Pope, a provision of freedom. As the Pope makes clear in Evangelium Vitae, the pro-life imperative also entails political responsibilities. This is the most evident in the case of public officials, legislators, judges, and others charged to shape and apply our laws. So public officials are bound to act in conformity with the great truth of our Declaration of Independence that all human beings are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including the very first place the right to life. So the basic right of the unborn child and every other member of the human family to the equal protection of the laws is no sectarian teaching. It is rather a principle of natural law, an objective moral truth recognizable in the light of natural reason by all men and women of good will. So in fact, this principle of natural justice is formally enshrined in the 14th Amendment to our Constitution. It is therefore not enough for a public official whose jurisdiction in any way extends to the question of abortion to be merely personally opposed to the taking of unborn human life. His or her obligation is to secure the legal protection of the unborn against abortion as a matter of strict justice. So it is a simple matter of applying the golden rule. Would the politician vote to protect, choose if it were he or someone dear to him, who was thereby subjected to the possibility of being killed for the convenience of welfare of others? So absolutely not. It is mere prejudice, and as the Pope affirms, grave injustice, to place the unborn or the terminally ill or anyone else in such position of vulnerability based upon age, size, location, stage of development, or condition of dependency. So the pro-life imperative demands that we give a certain priority to this struggle in carrying out our duties as citizens. In voting for candidates for public office, for example, we must take account of pressing political issues ranging from tax reform to environmental protection. But life itself is the most basic human right. And in a society which destroys human life by abortion unavoidably undermines respect for life in all other contexts. When it is not possible to overturn or completely abrogate a pro-abortion law, an elected official whose absolute personal opposition to abortion was well known, cloudlessly support proposals aimed at limiting the harm done by such law and at lessening its negative consequences at the level of general opinion and public morality. This does not in fact represent an illicit cooperation with an unjust law, but rather a legitimate and proper attempt to limit its evil access. So the universal and unconditional pro-life imperative demands that we work unceasingly, even if by necessity, incrementally, toward the ultimate goal of bringing our laws fully into line with requirements of true justice. So recently, some people of goodwill who plainly sympathize with the victims of the culture of death have begun to lose heart about the political struggle to restore the right to life of the unborn and to prevent the introduction of assisted suicide and euthanasia. So the Pope is here reminding us that the political action and legal form are crucial elements in the struggle to build a culture of life. Far from being alternatives to the cultural transformation in which we must bring about if respect for human life is to be restored in our country, there are indispensable means of accomplishing this transformation. Reform of the law is, to be sure, not the only means, nor it is sufficient. Prayer is indispensable too. So is direct assistance to pregnant women need. So is education. So I so so he have spoken, particularly the author of this spoken to the Pope's treatment of the evils of abortion and euthanasia. This, I think, is appropriate in view of the grave threat that these evils evils pose to so many innocent people in our society. It also worth noting that in Evangelium Vitae, the Holy Father, expressly invoking his full authority as the successor of Saint Peter, and teaching in communion with the bishops of the Catholic Church, formally declares that abortion, euthanasia, and every act involving the direct and voluntary killing of an innocent being is always gravely immoral. For example, the Holy Father condemns indifference to poverty, ignorance, and other impediments to the full development of the human person. He calls attention to the respects in which materialism, consumerism, and sexual immorality assault human dignity and contribute to the culture of death. And he praises both a new sensitivity ever more opposed to war as an instrument for the resolution of conflicts between peoples and the growing public opposition to the death penalty. So next is the Walnut Street. So Walnut Street opened in 1775, functioned as a holding facility housing the accused until they went to trial. So experiments with prisoners isolation began in the 1790s at the Walnut Street Jail located at between 5th and 6th Street behind Pennsylvania State House. So upon conviction, criminals face harsh public punishment including the stacks, whippings, brandings, and beatings. So all prisoners were sentenced to labor within the walls of the prison, thereby moving punishment from the public to the private, an important shift in penological theory. So prisoners worked every day except Sunday. Tasks included weaving, nail making, shoe making, and carding wool. So under the arrangement, prisoners served their sentence in complete isolation. Beginning in the early 18th century, prison society reformers began agitating for a new penitentiary to fully implement their vision of total prisoner isolation. So, penological pioneering in the Walnut Street, 1789 to 1799, by Rex A. Skidmore. So, prisons and jails are integral parts of our modern culture. They play a significant role in institutional treatment of violators of social norms. So one of the most influential of these early models in America was the Philadelphia jail located on Walnut and 6th Streets. It had no official name. In this article, it's called the Walnut Street Jail. So the Walnut Street Prison or the Philadelphia Jail It has played a significant role in development of penology in America and abroad. During the years of 1790 to 1835, many international dignitaries visit this prison, made carefully observation, and established modified replicas of it in their various countries. So although this jail is one of the most famous in penological history, no comprehensive account of it has yet been published. The purpose of this article is to present a brief description based and mainly on primary sources of some of the penological innovations development in this renowned Pennsylvania prison during its golden age between 1789 and 1799. So many of these pioneer practices have played a significant role in the development of penology in America and abroad and are presently advocated for the rehabilitation of criminals. So at first, the jail was characterized by severe and inhuman treatment. Little attempt was made to reform the criminals. Segregation and classification were hardly known. So rations were poor and irregularly given. Escapes, riots, and scenes of debauchery were common. The inmates were regarded as bad and unhappy creatures. They were offered little employment. Idleness, drunkenness, garnish, prostitution, and gambling were concomitant companions of the corrupt keepers. The meager in financial support of the institution by the county and the bodily punishments practiced in the jail. So Walnut Street Prison. The Walnut Street Prison was a pioneering effort in prison reform. Originally built as a conventional jail just before the American Revolution, it was expanded in 1790 and hailed as a model of enlightened thinking about criminals. The prison, in fact, was known as penitentiary, from the Latin word remorse. It was designed to provide a severe environment that left inmates much time for reflection, but it was also designed to be cleaner and safer than past prisons. The Walnut Street Prison was one of the forerunners of an entire school of thought on prison, construction, and reform. So it was the Quakers of Philadelphia who came up with the concept for what they called a penitentiary, a place where prisoners could reflect on their crime and become truly sorry for what they have done. So the Quakers believed that through reflection and repentance, inmates would give up crime and leave prison rehabilitated. So the main addition of the Walnut Street complex was a new cell block called Penitentiary House. Built in the courtyard of the existing structure, it included a series of small cells designed to hold individual prisoners. So the cell and the corridors connecting them were designed to prevent prisoners from communicating with each other. Windows were high. The cells had 9-foot ceilings and grated and lowered to prevent prisoners from looking onto the street. So each cell had a mattress, a water tap, and a private pipe. Inmates were confined to their cells for the duration of their confinement. The Quakers saw this solitary confinement not as a punishment, but as a time for reflection and remorse. That was the reason the inmates were not to put to work. Labor said penitentiary proponents would preoccupy the inmates and keep them reflecting on their crimes. So King Henry VIII. Henry was born at Greenwich on June 28, 1491, the second son of Henry VII of Elizabeth of York. He became heir to the throne on the death of his elder brother Prince Arthur in 1502 and succeeded in 1509. So Henry's varied interests and lack of application to government business and administration increased the influence of Thomas Wolsey, an Ipswich butcher's son who became Lord Chancellor in 1515. So Wolsey became one of the most powerful ministers in British history. So Wolsey was also appointed in cardinal in 1515 and given papal legate papal legate powers, which enabled him to bypass the Archbishop of Canterbury and govern the church in England. So Henry's interest in foreign policy was focused on Western Europe, which was shifting pattern of alliance centered around the kings of Spain and France and the Holy Roman Emperor. So for all his concerns over establishing his dynasty and the resulting religious upheaval, Henry's six marriages had produced one sickly son and an insecure succession with two princesses, Mary and Elizabeth, each of whom at some stage had been declared illegitimate, none of whom were to have children. So there are 7 surprising facts about King Henry VIII. So Henry was a king who hadn't been expected to rule. He only took the throne because his older brother had died, but he ended up embarking upon a religious reformation, cracking down on dissent, and marrying a grand total 6 wives in honor of Henry's coronation and the unexpected chain of events that followed. Here is some that events that followed. So he preferred play over work. Henry, once he was out of bed, he preferred hunting or hawking over the business of governing. So when his outdoor activities ended, Henry could find time to meet some of his obligations, but work had to be completed quickly. His nights were usually filled with dancing, gambling, or playing cards. So Henry was an author. When Martin Luther's 95 Theses challenged papal authority, Henry managed to pull himself away from hunting in order to support the church in Rome by writing Defense of the Seven Sacraments, Assertio Septem Sacramentorum, in 1521. This 30,000-word text became a bestseller. So to thank Henry, he was the first English king to write and publish a book. The Pope named him Defender of the Faith. Though Henry later broke with the Catholic Church, he never relinquished this title. So he wasn't great with the ladies. Not only did Henry rule a kingdom, but he was also tall, over 6 feet, in good shape, and had beautiful reddish gold hair. So on top of that, he was an accomplished musician who sang and played instruments such as the recorder of the lute. So however, all of this didn't make Henry a smashing success with the opposite sex. Next, he was hypochondriac. So though Henry was a healthy young man, he was still paranoid about getting sick and dying. So during outbreaks, Henry tried to minimize his risk of infection by steering clear of those who might been exposed to disease. When a severe wave of the sweating sickness hit in 1517 to 18, Henry left London for nearly a year. At that point, during the outbreak, the king refused to see ambassadors. However, his isolation was limited because he needed servants to take care of him. So he had a lot of health problems later in life. Precautions against the plague and the sweating sickness helped keep Henry safe from those diseases, but he wasn't able to protect himself entirely against ill health. His blood could have been to blame for his lack of male heir. So was Henry's blood responsible for his difficulty in siring a male heir? The fact that Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, experienced many miscarriages and the loss of children soon after fits this theory. So the theory is the KEL positive disorder, or it's a virus. So this means if the king impregnated a woman and the baby inherited KEL positive status, the mother would build up KEL antibodies. Though that first pregnancy would likely not to be affected, the future KEL positive fetuses would be attacked by those antibodies. So King Henry VIII is having a hard time to make a male to have a male heir. And the six wives, he only have two daughters and one legitimate son. But Henry's but King Henry also have mistresses and their children known as Edward. I know uh, his illegitimate son Henry Fitzroy was also first pregnancies of their respective mothers who are mistresses. So there are several theories that attempt to explain his behavior. Henry's been dead for several centuries, but researchers and biographers still wonder how to explain the paranoia, volatility, and tyrannical behavior he demonstrated in later years. So Henry had syphilis. Probably not, as this speculation has been credibly debunked. For example, if Henry had been given mercury, the go-to treatment for syphilis at the time, it would have been almost impossible to hide the side effects. Adjusting accident left Henry with brain damage. So the king did have a serious adjusting accidents in 1536, but he didn't display a sudden personality change afterward. So Henry had Micleod syndrome. This syndrome could account for Henry's later mobility issues. It also results in cognitive impairment. So it's tied to the Kell blood group. So the pregnancy problem experienced by Henry's partners are another indication of its favor. So next is his son, King Edward VI, a dual king of King Henry VIII. So King so Edward VI was born on October 12, 1537 and died on July 6, 1553. He was the king of England and Ireland from January 28, 1547 until his death in 1553. During his reign, the realm was governed by a regency council because he never reached maturity. So the council was first led by his uncle Edward Seymour, first Duke of Somerset. So although his father Henry VIII had severed the link between the Church and Rome, Henry VIII had never permitted the renunciation of Catholic doctrine or ceremony. It was during Edward's reign that Protestantism was established for the first time in England, with reforms that included the abolition of clerical celibacy and the Mass, and the imposition of compulsory services in the English. So at the time of King Edward VI, his religion was Protestant. So it, there are five fascinating facts about King Henry VIII, son of King Henry's eighth King Henry's eighth son, King Edward VI. So King Henry is one of the most legendary kings of England for many of the wrong reasons. He gained a fearsome reputation among his subjects. So Edward was King Henry's only legitimate son. So Henry was famously to have had six wives, two divorced, two executed, and one died in childhood, and the last that outlived him. His third wife, Jane Seymour, gave birth to one surviving son, Edward VI. So Henry acknowledged one illegitimate child, Henry Fitzroy, the son of his mistress Elizabeth Blunt, and granted him a dukedom. At least six others are suspected of being his illegitimate children, including Catherine and Henry Carey, the children of Anne's sisters Mary Boleyn. Edward grew up coddled and educated. So from the age of 6, Edward was educated in philosophy, theology, the sciences, French, Spanish, and Italian. So the visitors spoiled Edward with toys and luxuries that included his own troupe of musicians. So both of Edward's sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, doted on their younger brother. Edward wrote to Mary in 1546 that he loved her most, and Elizabeth had gifted him a shirt of her own working. Henry demanded his son's household to be strictly secured and clean. as little Edward was this whole realm's most precious jewel. So Prince Edward was betrothed as a young boy. In July 1543, Henry VIII signed the Treaty of Greenwich with the Scots, in which would not only unite the two kingdoms but the betrothal between 6-year-old Edward and 7-month-old Mary, Queen of Scots. In a turn of events, the Scots renounced the treaty 6 months later to renew their alliance with France. So Henry was furious and ordered Prince Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, Earl, Earl of Hertford, to attack Scotland in possible the most brutal military assault launched by England against the Scots. So this war was known as the Rough Wooing, would continue into Edward's reign. So Edward ascended to the English throne at just 9 years old. So King Henry VIII died on January 28, 1547, and was laid to rest beside Edward's mother, Queen Jane Seymour. At his request, possibly for the sole reason of having bore him the son he desperately desired. So since Edward was still young, at the time Henry passed away, he arranged a council of regency that would rule on Edward's behalf. This was overridden by Edward Seymour, who was the uncle of Edward, who took power and named himself Protector. 9-year-old Edward VI was crowned at Westminster Abbey on February 20, 1547, the first English Protestant king. Last is Edward had quite the busy 6-year reign. An English prayer book was published in 1549 with an act of uniformity to ensure it was used across the country. Peasants in the country rebelled against the book. Simultaneously, Kett's rebellion from Norfolk responded to the enclosure of land, concentrating economic and social injustices. So in addition, the French declared war on England. So Kett's rebellion was suppressed by John Dudley, Earl of Warwick. Dudley would unexpectedly use his victory to engineer the downfall of Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour. So the 14-year-old Edward wrote of his uncle's execution plainly and coldly. The Duke of Somerset had his head cut off upon the Tower Hill between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning. So by this time, Edward was writing on subjects such as military campaigns and currency reform, and was being briefed by advisors selected by him. So Edward also was the one to order to kill his uncle. So in 1553, Edward was rapidly dying from a lung infection, most likely tuberculosis, and composed a device for royal succession. So the device was the most puzzling document of Edward's reign, a trick of the elusive and shrewd boy king. So Edward recognized Mary and Elizabeth as illegitimate, especially Mary for her Catholic faith and her threat to dismantle Protestant efforts in England. So Edward named his first cousin once removed, Lady Jane Grey, as his successor. So in conclusion, on July 6, 1553, Edward whispered his last prayer and died at the age of 15 at Greenwich Palace at 8 p.m. His last words were, "I am faint, Lord, have mercy upon me, and take my spirit." He was buried in Henry VII Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey on August 8, 1553. So, Edward was a man of faith. Edward became king in 1547 at the age of 9. So by that time he was fired with an evangelizing zeal. So Edward spent several hours a day in a private devotion and determined that his subjects should conform his faith. He spent much of his short reign implementing a series of radical reforms that would establish a strong Protestant doctrine in England. In January 1549, the first book of Common Prayer was published. Its aim was to establish uniformity of worship for all, and it was followed by an even more extreme version 3 years later. This, the second book of Common Prayer, provided a model for worship within the Church of England for the next 4 centuries. So at the same time, Edward's council banned a number of old Catholic rituals, such as the use of rosaries, the casting of holy water, and the undertaking of pilgrimage, because Edward was a Protestant. So he also wrote that um, no. So this had a profound impact upon the lives of Edward's subjects, including those closest to the king. An entry of Edward's journal for January 1552 records, "The Emperor Ambassador moved me severally that my sister Mary might have mass, which with no little reasoning with that my sister Mary have without reasoning with him was denied him. If he had lived to maturity, there is a little doubt that Edward would have persecuted any nonconformist with increasing severity, even more so, perhaps, that his elder half-sister later did. Though young, Edward had a maturity beyond his years. So the Italian physician and astrologer Hieronymus Cardano described how Edward carried himself like an old man, and yet he was always available, gentle as became his age. He also wrote that Edward was of stature somewhat below the middle height, pale-faced with grey eyes, a grave aspect, decorous and handsome, but for all his accomplishment, the inescapable fact was that Edward remained a minor. So that's all for King Edward. So King Edward was the only son of King Henry VIII, illegitimate son, and at the young age he was a very intelligent prince, and but he has an empathy. He does not have feelings of his two sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, who are also legitimate daughters, but he denied them as legitimate daughters of King Henry VII. So 15 at 15 years old, King Edward was King Edward died. King Edward died of the disease in his lungs. So that's all for Module 1. Thank you.